Buried Bloodline is the Warlord's Ruin Dungeon exotic and exotic sidearm. It is a sidearm, but it feels like it operates more like a crossbow, even down to the sound of the weapon itself. But, you know, it's still pretty close to a sidearm. Buried Bloodline is a very simple weapon. The gun fires 2 shots at once, and if both hit, you lifesteal. After getting a multi-kill, not with the same shot, although I'm sure that's fine too, pop off, you gain Devour, and if you have the Catalyst, hitting a target while you have Devour active will weaken the target. That's it. That's the whole gun. It's pretty simple, no super complex mechanics here. You shoot stuff to buff yourself, and then eventually debuff the enemy. So initially, I thought, all right, what can we do with Void on this thing to kind of beef it up? And honestly, I'm not too sure. The main point of a good chunk of Void builds across all classes is specifically to gain Devour and perhaps utilize weakness. One of my Warlock's current builds is literally just that. Devour and spam Child of the Old Gods for weakness. My Titan plays more of a support role whenever I'm on Void, and one of the most popular Hunter builds revolves around Jur Falcon's Hauberk, but also has Devour built in because it's dumb not to take it. The point is, Devour is already a core part of many Void builds out there, and it's not that expensive to activate, nor is it that expensive to include in a Void build in the first place. So I'm not sure this is a weapon I would want to include in a Void build if the sole purpose is to get Devour. Weakness is another story, sure, but you don't really need weakness on every target you encounter. I'm not going to say it's the worst idea in the world to use this with a Void build. I'm just saying that ultimately, a chunk of the benefit of the weapon can just be a fragment. This feels more like an experiment that Bungie is running to see what happens when you start introducing more subclass effects in a way that don't require you to be on a specific subclass, like Exderis from last season, or Navigator, or Precious Scars. I've seen many a screenshot of some crazy buffs being stacked mainly on Titan, you know, Banner of War and Devour, Restoration and Overshield and Devour, combining the most powerful subclass effects from one subclass with another. Initially, I was of the mindset that I didn't really want to combine the subclass effects from this weapon with, like, I don't know, solar build on my Titan, because one, it's good enough as is, and two, I was going to lose my Callus mini tool in exchange for this sidearm, which I didn't want to do, and three, I don't want to have to juggle multiple elements of a build, like doing all of my solar stuff and worrying about keeping up Devour, especially when we only have 4 buff indicators. But as I thought about it more, as I talked with my community more, there are some builds that can absolutely be enhanced by including this sidearm into their kit. Just because a build feels complete already doesn't mean that other builds don't. Stasis Hunter's Renewal Grasp build was something that I tried out, and this sidearm absolutely helps this build. Devour being active means more Duskfield grenades for protection, and if you thought you were unkillable before, stack in the healing, and you are just not gonna die in a Duskfield grenade. Is this a build I really care about that much? Not really, but does this build get beefed up by some degree with Buried Bloodline? I think so. You know, if not an enhancement, then definitely a side grade at the least. This is just one example in what is probably an ocean of examples. I heard the most amount of conversation towards Hunter-specific builds, like Jur Falcons, even though it's Void already, Shards of Galanor knife setups, since most of your primary weapon damage is coming from knives. I even saw someone suggest Lucky Raspberry. You're going to get maximum value out of a grenade-focused setup, since you'll be wanting to use your grenades as much as possible, but it's not like the healing is terrible to have. How viable these builds are in endgame content are a different story, though. Sure, you can coast through the coil with this stuff, and it is pretty fun to use it all, but solo content and endgame content may demand a bit more of your setup depending on what you're doing. This isn't anything new to the build crafting world, though, and I imagine the bulk of people are playing content where pretty much any build is going to work. Some of the conversation comes down to the question of, are you willing to sacrifice your energy slot weapon, which can aid in the generation of subclass effects for the subclass you're running, in exchange for subclass buffs that are not linked to your current subclass? Is that opportunity cost too great? If you're running this sidearm, your kinetic elemental options are strand or stasis, so light subclasses get hit a bit harder. Your heavy is also your main boss damage dealer and tends to not include subclass effects very often. Tends to. You could opt for a primary weapon with osmosis or now permeability to get an element on your primary weapon. They're not going to have any sort of subclass perks like incandescent or volt shot, but at least you can get their elements to match for certain fragments here and there. Ember of Empyrean probably being the easiest to make an example of. Or, again, you can just stick to stasis or strand because at least your primary can match your subclass. I'm not saying you can't use it on a light subclass, but you got to think about how much you're going to give up versus how much you're going to be gaining. Some builds are also just pretty complete already, or just have very little wiggle room, like burst damage Strand Titan being a prime example. Alright, so enough about build crafting and all that. How about the gun, Datto? How about the actual gun in the field? Well, it does respectable damage compared to other special weapons, but if you really want the top damage options, you need to roll with something a bit more specialized in damage dealing. Fusions with controlled burst, certain sniper perk combinations. This is not a weapon that is technically built with high DPS in mind. But with the catalyst and that weaken effect, it starts to close the gap, and in your day-to-day stuff where you're not killing these crazy bosses, it's not too shabby. I sort of likened it to a trace rifle in that it hits a bit harder than your typical primary, but it's still a special weapon. However, this weapon at least has the benefit of dealing damage sort of on par with a typical special weapon, and has the rate of fire to match the special weapon vibe, so it still feels like a special weapon for the most part. But I can understand if people don't like the idea of running a primary and Buried Bloodline at the same time. Also, don't let Sidearm fool you. You do not need to be super close to your targets to be effective with this weapon. I was hip-firing this thing a good amount of the time. A comparison that is natural to make is against Collective Obligation, as it is considered the Void gun if you want to adopt the playstyle that Collective Obligation demands. It requires you to be on Void unless you want to be siphoning debuffs from your teammates, which I think is kind of awkward. Even then, I still think you would be on Void. Originally, I wanted to skew towards Collective Obligation because the build feels more complete and has more of an identity, but it does take a lot of extra effort on the player's part to make sure that setup works. Whereas with Buried Bloodline, it's point, it's shoot, and you just gain all the benefits, and you don't really need to do anything. You don't need to work as hard, you have that flexibility with your build, but you lose out on having a more traditional special weapon, and when Collective is fully ramped up, it is a menace in PvE. Ultimately, they're a little hard to compare because their playstyles are so vastly different to one another, they just both happen to deal with Void keywords in some way. PvP-wise, I think the main competition here is Forerunner, and honestly, if you're a Forerunner user, I don't really see you switching to Buried Bloodline full-time as it is right now. Forerunner is just built for PvP, and while Buried Bloodline can work out pretty well, I don't know if it's really going to be enough to get people to switch over other than just when they get the weapon and wanting to try it out. That's all I really have to say on the weapon. I don't feel like there is too much to say in general unless I get into some really specific build crafting, which wasn't really the point of the video. I don't know if there is some super insane build for this weapon right now, if that's what you were looking for or you were hoping for. If anything, I feel like Stasis has an opportunity to shine because they don't have a ton of healing, and you'll have headstone weapons in the kinetic slot, but Stasis isn't that popular in the PvE world right now, so is anyone even going to run that? I don't know. It's fine for seasonal content, non-master content, maybe even non-legend content, stuff like that, but, you know, again, so is literally everything. You got your pick. You can do whatever you want. I think it's a neat novelty. I think it's a neat little experiment, but because it doesn't have as well of a defined role, it's going to take either more tools in the game or some more experience with the weapon for it to find its place. Or maybe this thing just ends up in the vault, which is okay. Not every exotic is going to be the next greatest weapon of all time. Some of them are just novelties, they're experiments, they're toys, really. Conceptually, the idea of combining subclass effects of multiple subclasses is interesting, but some builds are already so well defined that I don't know where Buried Bloodline is really going to sneak in. That's not to say you can't get creative, but for the people who don't want to get creative, I have a feeling this weapon is going to end up in the vault for you. I also didn't feel the need to stack a bunch of buffs just because I could. I care more about having a gameplay loop or a combo to achieve or some kind of a goal versus just look at all my buffs. You know, some people like that. If you do, go nuts. Let's go get that catalyst. First thing you need to do is complete the entire dungeon quest with all of the bones and the currencies and all that stuff. That's got to be completely done. Then you got to have the gun, you know, in case that's not obvious. Once you got all that, we can get the catalyst. The first spot where you need to go do something is when you're in jail after the first boss. After you get out of jail, look for this closed off area with a taken orb and 4 torches on the wall of, let's call it a jail cell. When you shoot the taken ball, 3 torches will light up in a sequence and 4 totems will spawn around you in the jail cells. The torches on the wall correspond to the position of the totems, and you need to activate these totems in the order in which the torches were lit. Use this chart to help coordinate yourselves. If you do it correctly, the taken ball will disappear. It will not go away until you do it correctly. You can do this by yourself, you just need to be fast, but I would recommend doing it as a team. The second sequence is technically before the big bridge. The taken ball is up and behind you when you land on the bridge for the first time, with the torches lining the wall of the side you ran up to get to the bridge in the first place. The torch order this time is literally just 1 to 1. There's 5 torches instead of 4. So the torch closest to the bridge links with the totem closest to the bridge, and then all the way back down the way you came. Same thing, shoot the taken ball, activate the totems in the order that the torches were lit. The best place to see the sequence happen is right here on what is Totem 3's platform. The third sequence is after the second boss once you get to the outside taken ball area. There are 4 torches here on this doorway, and here is how they correspond with the totems. Torch totem number 1 is all the way up around this area, like as you're going to the final boss. Torch totem number 2 is pretty much right next to it. Totem 3 is floating in the middle of the area, and then totem 4 is just, you know, the last one. We're reading the torches from left to right in this case. The taken ball is a bit further down in this section. Shoot to activate, stand in the totems, and then move to the end of the dungeon before the spiral staircase. Locate the Toland ball at the bottom of the stairs and enter that secret room. As soon as you enter this main room, a fight is going to start. Note the 6 torches in the middle of the room. These are going to be split 3 left and 3 right. Kill both knights to spawn in totems, and then look at which torches are lit. If the left side is lit, you activate the left totems. So the right side is the right totems. They do not appear to need to be activated in a specific order. I think you just need to activate them. At least, you know, we tried both ways and it worked both times. Once you activate the totems and once Imminent Wish falls off, the boss will be vulnerable if you did it right. Rinse, repeat until the boss dies, and then the catalyst will be yours. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you next time.